Back in the late 90s, I wrote an article in the first edition of my Applied Metabolics newsletter about a little-known substance called nitric oxide. No one had ever really heard of it at that time. In fact, about 3 months before, three scientists had shared the Nobel Prize in medicine for actually figuring out what nitric oxide was. Prior to that, scientists knew that there was a substance produced in the endothelium. The endothelium is the lining of the blood vessels. And these blood vessels contain smooth muscle, which allows them to expand or contract. The expansion is called dilation of the blood vessels. So the scientists knew that there was something in the blood vessels, something secreted by the lining of the blood vessels, that once it appeared, the blood vessels immediately dilated, extremely dilated. But they weren't able to figure it out, because when they tried to find it, it was gone. It was like a biological ghost. It would do its job and then just disappear. So they named it endothelial relaxation factor. All they knew about this stuff was that it seemed to be some kind of gaseous substance. And what it did is that as soon as it appeared, the smooth muscle which lines the endothelium, which causes the contraction of the blood vessel, relaxed. So as a consequence, they called it the endothelial relaxation factor. And then, as I said, in the 90s, a couple of scientists around the world, including one from UCLA, figured out exactly what endothelial relaxation factor was, and they named it nitric oxide based on its structure. Now, how they figure out how much, how and when nitric oxide is secreted, even to this day, nobody's been able to capture actual nitric oxide, because it's a ephemeral gas. I mean, it seems to be synthesized in the blood vessel and some other areas of the brain, and then it just disappears. It's like within milliseconds, it's gone. But what they can do is they can find the byproducts of nitric oxide metabolism, and these byproducts are called nitrates and nitrites. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to explain exactly how you can save a lot of money on nitric oxide supplements, or I should say nitric oxide boosting supplements, because there's no such thing as a nitric oxide supplement. Obviously, you couldn't capsulize a ephemeral gas. It's just not possible. But so what they do is they put in precursors. It turns out that the nutritional direct, let's say, starting substance or precursor for nitric oxide is the amino acid L-arginine. So most of these nitric oxide supplements contain L-arginine with a couple of other nutrients that thought to support nitric oxide metabolism, such as a couple of antioxidants, and I'll get to that in a couple of minutes, why they might have antioxidants in these supplements. But the point that you want to understand about nitric oxide boosting supplements is that the amount of arginine, unfortunately, in these supplements averages about 4 to 4.5 grams, and that is not enough really to cause a significant nitric oxide boost in the body. Nitric oxide, by the way, is also known as NO, N-O, for obvious reasons. But anyway, the amount of arginine in these nitric oxide boosting supplements at 4 grams or so is not enough to do anything. To get a true nitric oxide boost, you'd have to give arginine intravenously at a minimal dose of about 18 grams, a lot more than is included in any oral food supplement. And there's a reason why these companies keep it to 4 grams. And the reason is because arginine in larger doses causes nausea and gastrointestinal distress. We first discovered this years ago when arginine was being touted as a growth hormone stimulant. A lot of bodybuilders figured the more the better, but as soon as they started to take over 10 grams of oral arginine, very often they would either vomit or just get nauseous, so they couldn't hold it down. Another reason why arginine is not great as a nitric oxide booster when ingested orally is because it encounters a number of barriers after it's ingested. Mainly, the main one is in the form of an enzyme that exists in the liver and the gut called arginase. arginase immediately degrades oral arginine. So even if you take a good amount, a lot of it's not going to wind up in the blood. It's going to be degraded. And there's a couple of other barriers that are kind of beyond the scope of this video. Maybe one day I'll do a separate video on arginine. And it's probably a good idea to do that because I don't want to give the impression that arginine is junk. It is hardly that. It's got a lot of useful qualities. But my point being here is that as far as a nitric oxide booster ingested orally, it's not that great. It's not really something you could count on. There are some bodybuilders who've taken these nitric oxide supplements and sworn by them, and I'll tell you what's going on there. If you check the ingredients of these nitric oxide boosters, very often they have a carbohydrate source, and the carbohydrate source is usually what they call a high glycemic or quick-acting carb source. This type of carb stimulates insulin release. Insulin itself is a little known fact about it. When we know about insulin stimulating fat, stimulating the uptake of amino acids into muscle, but it also actually stimulates nitric oxide formation. So when these guys take these supplements, it's not the arginine that's causing any type of nitric oxide effect. It's the actual carbohydrates in the supplement. And even then, the effect's not that great. I would say that most of the big pump that some of these guys rave about, the pumping effect in their whatever muscle they're training after taking a nitric oxide booster, I would suggest that a large part of it is a placebo effect. In other words, they believe it's going to happen and it happens. I wrote about the placebo effect in a recent issue of my Applied Metabolics newsletter. It's just shocking how much of a role placebo plays in exercise and nutrition. I mean, you'd be absolutely stunned. If you read that article, you will see you'll be in for a big surprise. Suffice to say that a large percentage of the supplements that you're probably using are working by the placebo effect. In other words, they're doing something, but they're not doing what they're supposed to do. They're doing it because you think they're supposed to do it. But that's, again, a whole new subject. So let's get back to nitric oxide itself. Okay, so we know it's not available in supplements. You can only somehow ingest precursors or substances that can be kind of turned into nitric oxide in the body, or substances that will promote the synthesis of nitric oxide in the blood vessels. Now, the main, let's say, limiting factor for nitric oxide production is not any type of precursor like L-arginine or anything else, but rather it's the activity of the enzyme that converts arginine into nitric oxide, and these are called nitric oxide synthetases. And there's 3 known enzymes like this, but the one we're going to be focusing on today is the one that's in the lining of the arteries, because that's the one that gives you the muscle pump and causes and promotes a lot of health effects. It's called endothelial nitric oxide synthetase. We'll just call it for simplicity the nitric oxide enzyme. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about what is nitric oxide actually. Okay, nitric oxide's a gas. It's also a neurotransmitter in the brain, and it can actually, it's involved in the transmission of nerve impulses. When I wrote my article in the late 90s, when those scientists got the Nobel Prize for figuring out what nitric oxide is, it instituted a just huge surge of research, and the implications of nitric oxide were so fantastic. It affected so many body systems that it was actually called it was given the award of Molecule of the Year. I think that was 1998. Unfortunately, at the award ceremony, nitric oxide didn't show up, which is to be expected since it's a gas and it's kind of a ghost. So I don't know who accepted the award. I think it was Justin Bieber accepted the award. But anyway, moving on, nitric oxide is a gas, and it's a component of automobile exhaust. I mean, you're kind of breathing in nitric oxide. It's a cheap way to do it. I wouldn't suggest sticking your mouth in a exhaust pipe unless you want to do your next workout at the big gym in the sky. It's also found in smog. We get a lot of that here in LA, that brown crap in the air that when you're landing in a plane, it looks like the city's engulfed in this kind of rug of brown smog. The nitric oxide's a large part of that, believe it or not. And it's also in cigarette smoke. An interesting thing about nitric oxide, is that it's what they call a free radical. Now, some of you who might have read about nutrition might be familiar with the term free radical. Free radical is basically usually a byproduct of oxygen metabolism, and it's a single electron. And you see, electrons like to come in pairs. And the problem with free radicals is because it's a single electron, it always wants to kind of latch on to other electrons to become a whole. In other words, it wants to be two electrons. Unfortunately, it will latch onto electrons in things like the cell membrane, and the fatty acids in the cell membrane will latch onto those electrons, and it can wreak havoc all over the body. It's related to cancer, related to heart disease, related to aging. This is what free radicals do. Although recent research shows that it also has it's kind of a double-edged sword, because it turns out free radicals are also involved in a lot of good things in the body, like thyroid production. Also, they're involved in, believe it or not, anabolic effects in muscle, which is why you got to be careful about taking antioxidants too close to a workout. Again, that's a whole new topic, much too involved to discuss here. But the point I'm trying to make is that nitric oxide is a free radical, which means it's what they call a Janus substance. Janus is a general term meaning two-faced. So why do I call nitric oxide a Janus molecule? Because it does a lot of good things, and it can cause a lot of bad things if it shows up in excess. For example, let's say you were able to purchase a nitric oxide boosting supplement that really was effective at stimulating huge amounts of stimulating nitric oxide. Now, typically, a lot of people figure if it says to take 4 capsules, I'm going to take 8 or 12 capsules to get an even greater pump, an even better effect. Now, if this supplement really boosted nitric oxide and you overdid it, you would have if you had a massive rush or massive release of nitric oxide, this would not be a good thing at all. And I'll give you an example of why. You might have heard of the term blood poisoning, which the medical term is called septicemia. And what it means is it has to do with bacteria that gets in the blood. It causes this massive immune response. But the thing that actually kills you, it has a 50% mortality rate. The thing that actually kills you is not so much the bacteria. They release what they call endotoxins. Again, it gets complicated, but anyway, the point is, the thing that kills you is you go into shock. In other words, your blood pressure drops so low that all your organs fail and you die. That's how you die from septic shock related to septicemia. Now, what is it that actually causes your blood pressure to drop to nothing? Excess nitric oxide. There's a massive release of nitric oxide when you have septicemia, which is what the doctors are trying to control to keep you alive. So you don't want a lot of nitric oxide now you know why, right? Okay, now I said earlier that arginine is not a reliable source of nitric oxide production. The question is, what are good sources? I mean, is there another way? Instead of spending like $60 on a bottle of a nitric oxide boosting supplement that probably will not even boost nitric oxide, is there a safe, easy, and most importantly, very inexpensive way to boost nitric oxide? And yes, there is, and it's as close to you as the nearest plate of vegetables, which might surprise you. Some of you who've seen some of my other videos have noted I've talked about beets and beet juice. Okay, and it's not beets and beet juice. The active element in relation to nitric oxide is what they call nitrates, natural nitrates. And this is how those scientists were able to figure out nitric oxide. They found nitrates and nitrites in the blood. Those are the kind of metabolites of nitric oxide metabolism, but they also exist naturally in foods. The best food sources of nitrate are vegetables, particularly spinach, lettuce, celery, and a vegetable that I really am not that familiar with called rocket, which is not the thing that takes you up into space. It's some sort of vegetable. Of course, beets and beet juice are still probably the best sources of natural nitrates. Okay, now you might have heard that there's been a lot of studies, and people always telling you to eat your fruits and vegetables. I'm sure you've heard that. And the reason why fruits and vegetables are healthy is because a good amount of research shows they seem to help prevent degenerative diseases, including cardiovascular disease and cancer and many other diseases. For years, they tried to figure out what is in vegetables and fruits that are the active components that have a preventive effect against disease. And they thought it was the antioxidant content. Fruits and vegetables have a good amount of natural antioxidants, vitamin C, vitamin A, and a couple of others. And then they said, well, it could also be the fiber content. Fiber is has a tremendous health effect. Again, that's another video or another article. It's way too complex, but suffice to say that fiber is a very protective element. But more recent research suggests that the actual the amount of antioxidants in fruits and vegetables, it's tiny. It's minuscule. They don't really have a lot of they have antioxidants, but it's enough to keep you healthy, but not enough to really do anything therapeutically. So they said that, well, this stuff really can't be that preventive. So what else is in fruits and vegetables? And what they now realize is that some vegetables contain natural nitrates. And it's the nitrates that are probably the most protective natural elements found in vegetables, right? Now, what do the nitrates do? Let's talk about what no does. If you keep your no at a optimal release and synthesis, or synthesis and release level, it lowers blood pressure. For some reason, it doesn't lower blood pressure very well in people that are already taking medications to lower blood pressure. It also prevents platelet aggregation. Platelet aggregation is the sticking of blood. Platelets are elements in the blood that are involved in the clotting process. They're needed to prevent you from bleeding out, so you don't die like a hemophiliac might. But unfortunately, sometimes the platelets get out of control. They aggregate too much. They form a clot inside let's say, coronary artery, and they can initiate a heart attack. So you want to keep the platelets from excessive aggregation, and no does that. No, and a couple of other things. No also lowers inflammation. Inflammation is at the heart of many diseases, including heart disease and cancer and brain diseases like Alzheimer's disease. It also prevents excessive hypertrophy of the heart, excessive growth of the heart. This is what no does. It prevents excessive growth of the heart that could eventually result in heart failure as you get older. 60% of older people wind up with heart failure. A lot of that has to do with lack of exercise throughout their life, though. It's not necessarily related to nitric oxide. Nitric oxide also maintains arterial flexibility. Now, what you say, who cares about that? I'll tell you why. Because when your arteries stiffen with age, that's a precursor for atherosclerosis, which is basically the laying down of plaque in the arteries. And when that happens, the arteries get narrowed. And if you get one of those clot formations that I mentioned earlier, you can get either a heart attack or stroke. You always want to maintain flexible arteries, and exercise is very, very important for doing that, both aerobic exercise and weight training, especially aerobics, though. But anyway, that's, again, that's a subject there. But also another way that nitric oxide protects you is it prevents the oxidation of low-density lipoproteins. Low-density lipoproteins are the protein carriers of cholesterol in the blood. As long as low-density lipoprotein is not oxidized, it's harmless. In fact, it does a lot of good things by transporting cholesterol throughout the body. It allows you to use that cholesterol to build cell membranes, and that cholesterol that's transported by low-density lipoprotein is sent to the testes, where it's used by the Leydig cells to actually synthesize testosterone. So LDL is not, they call it the bad cholesterol, which is really a misnomer. It's only bad when it's oxidized. And it turns out that nitric oxide prevents the oxidation of low-density lipoprotein. So that, in that way, it also helps to prevent cardiovascular disease. Another way is it having an optimal level of no, or I should say a production of no, since it doesn't stay. To say it's a level means it sounds like it's there all the time. It's not. It's like a biological ghost. But it also lowers blood triglycerides, which are fat in the blood, also a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, right? And some really interesting new studies related to nitric oxide have shown that it stimulates the conversion of white adipose tissue. That's your usual fat tissue. They call it white adipose tissue. It can has the ability to convert white adipose tissue into brown adipose tissue, known by the acronym BAT. Now, brown adipose tissue is thermogenic tissue. It converts calories into heat. And that means that if you have a very active brown adipose tissue in your body, you'll be able to eat more food and ingest more calories without getting fat, because those calories will be converted into heat rather than stored. So that's still another feature of nitric oxide. Now, as far as nitrates, even though this information all sounds new, back in 1880, a scientist put sodium nitrate under his tongue, I think it was, which is exactly what heart patients do today. They use nitrates to treat what they call angina pectoris, which is basically it's caused by the heart not getting enough blood. When they take the nitrate pills, it basically stimulates nitric oxide production in the coronary arteries. It opens up the arteries, the coronary arteries, so the heart muscle can get oxygen, and the pain goes away. So this scientist accidentally, serendipitously, put some, I don't know why he did it, he put some sodium nitrate under his tongue, and he somehow felt that his blood vessels had widened. So this is back in 1880. And before that, the Chinese had been using forms of nitrate for thousands of years, again, to increase blood circulation. They didn't know why, but they knew that eating certain foods, and they didn't even know about nitrates, they just knew that eating these foods somehow seemed to increase blood circulation, which is kind of fascinating. This is going on for thousands of years. Now, 80% of the nitrate, now nitrate is Nitrate. Now, the other thing is called nitrite, Nitrite. They're two different things, and I'll explain that in a second. But 80% of the natural nitrate that we get from food does come from vegetables. There's small amounts in drinking water. As far as nitrites, that's available naturally in cured meats, cereal, and vegetables. Related to the cured meat stuff, you might have heard that some forms of meat have been related to colon cancer, and it turns out that this is related to the nitrite. Nitrite is added to processed meat to prevent because it kills microbes, it kills bacteria, and unfortunately, there's an effect when the nitrates found in, let's say, processed meats, when they combine with amino acid byproducts called amines in the stomach, with the gastric acidity, it causes a combining effect where you get these chemicals called nitrosamines produced. Nitrosamines are related to stomach cancer. And for years, people have been told to avoid eating processed meat and avoid ingesting nitrites because of this possible carcinogen effect. The truth of the matter is, though, that what they now know is you'd have to eat massive amounts of nitrites in foods to have this effect. And secondarily, if there's any antioxidants, nutrients present, such as vitamin C, it neutralizes the effect and it completely prevents the formation of nitrosamines. So, but you want to have small amounts of nitrates in your food because it's a precursor for nitric oxide. See, okay. Now, the interesting thing, nitrates that you get in your vegetables are 100% bioavailable. In other words, they're completely absorbed because they bypass what they call first pass metabolism in the liver, right? Okay, now, when you ingest nitrates in vegetables, let's say beets, for example. You drink beet juice. Now, what happens is you have some strains of bacteria in your saliva. There's about 14 known strains that are known to do this. These particular oral bacteria contain an enzyme that, as soon as it encounters nitrates from your food, it actually the enzyme in this bacteria converts the nitrates into nitrites, right? The nitrites. Now, in a past video, I suggested that if you want to have the full benefits of drinking beet juice or eating these vegetables, don't use a antiseptic mouthwash because it kills off all the oral bacteria. Since then, I've come across some information indicating that natural mouthwashes, including Listerine, do not kill off the beneficial bacteria that convert nitrates into nitrate. What does kill it off are the pharmaceutical or drug versions of mouthwashes. For example, chlorhexidrine, which is available over the counter. That will completely negate the whole system I'm about to tell you, because it kills off the first step in the process, which is oral bacteria conversion of nitrate into nitrite, right? Okay, now what happens after the nitrites are produced by the enzymatic action of oral bacteria is about, you swallow about 5% of it, and it goes to the gut. Other enzymes convert the nitrite into nitric oxide, right? So this is a direct well, it's not really direct, but it's a far more reliable way of producing nitric oxide than depending on an arginine-based nitric oxide boosting supplement, which 99% of the time will not boost nitric oxide. This is a controlled system. You can't produce too much. You won't produce enough nitric oxide to go into shock, because it's controlled by enzymes, and the body's like a computer. It can sense when there's too much nitric oxide being produced, and what it will do is it'll kick out some antioxidant, natural endogenous antioxide enzymes, which will neutralize the excess nitric oxide. So there's no danger of any kind of negative effect from this system of eating vegetables, right? Okay, now this nitrates, the nitrate that you consume, it lasts about 6 hours in the blood, just for your own information. I talked about the prescription, the blood vessels. You do have to have a certain amount of stomach acid. In that second part, after you swallow the nitrite, you have to have a certain amount of stomach acid present to allow the conversion into nitric oxide. So, if you take things that'll neutralize stomach acid, like Tums or actually proton pump inhibitors, these are drugs that people with ulcers take. They neutralize stomach acid, but in doing so, it will also destroy or negate this nitric oxide producing system that I'm discussing here. So if you really want it to work, don't use anything that's going to neutralize stomach acid. Okay, so now, why would you want to do this? Because it turns out as in relation to exercise, when you increase nitric oxide production in the body, you increase, of course, you dilate the blood vessels. This increases blood flow to muscle, and it also increases oxygen delivery to muscle. So the net effect is you have greater workout intensity and greater workout endurance and less feelings of fatigue, right? Now, recent studies, and this has been on the internet, this is one of the reasons why I made this particular video, because I noticed some of these websites that have gleefully pointed out some recent studies showing that when you give, let's say, beet juice, which is, again, the best natural source of nitrates, if you give them to elite athletes, you don't get much of a nitric oxide effect. It doesn't seem to do anything. So, these various blogs, the headlines have said, beet juice fails. It doesn't work. Vegetables fail. It doesn't produce nitric oxide. Again, here we go. More internet nonsense. Here's what happens with elite athletes. First of all, you have to understand that what actually produces nitric oxide in the blood vessels. I'll tell you what produces it. When the blood is rushing through the blood vessels, like when you stimulate blood circulation, like when you're working out, when you're involved in athletics, the blood circulation obviously increases because the blood, the heart's pumping blood to the muscle. So so there's an increased blood circulation. This increased blood circulation has a shearing effect. It kind of like, I guess in a way, it scrapes against the endothelium or lining of the blood vessels. As soon as it does that, that stimulates nitric oxide because the blood vessels say, oh, something's putting pressure on me, so I'm going to have to dilate. So it immediately kind of kicks up the nitric oxide synthesizing enzyme. And if you have any arginine or nitrate circulating, boom, there's nitric oxide suddenly appears and dilates the blood vessel. So what does this mean? How does this relate to athletes? Think about it. Athletes are always exercising, they're always practicing, they're increasing their skills. They have a highly developed nitric oxide system. So in other words, if you give them something that's a precursor, like let's say these vegetables or beets, if you give it to elite athletes, I mean, they're already producing like really good amounts of nitric oxide on their own. They don't have atherosclerosis. They don't have any damage to the endothelium that might limit nitric oxide production. They're maximized already. It's like pouring glass in a water that already is full. It's not going to do anything. The water's going to overflow. So basically, you could say they have natural higher baseline ingestions. It's kind of similar. I guess a good analogy would be creatine in meat eaters. If a guy or a woman eats meat, let's say 3-4 times a week, and they suddenly start taking a creatine supplement, they're not going to get a great effect from it because the habitual eating of meat meat's a good source of creatine, and by eating meat all the time, it allows the creatine to build up in the muscles, so they're already kind of loaded with creatine. In other words, the muscles already have a good amount of creatine. So if they take a creatine supplement, they're not going to get much of effect. Now, contrast this with a vegan or vegetarian. They don't eat meat, they only produce 1 gram of creatine in their bodies. Now, if they take a creatine supplement, they're going to get a massive effect. They're going to get a huge effect. So you can see the correlation here that I'm trying to make between elite athletes and let's say nitrates or beets. They are already maximized on their nitric oxide production because of their conditioning and their training. So yeah, if you give them beet juice, or if they eat vegetables, they're still going to get a nitric oxide effect because this stuff is still converted to nitric oxide. It just won't be as significant as somebody who's not in that category. In other words, not an elite world-class athlete. And by the way, this system would also be very good to, let's say, long-term anabolic drug users, because very often these people already have some damage to their endothelium, or lining of the blood vessels. And when you damage the lining of the blood vessels, the nitric oxide, the enzyme that produces nitric oxide, it doesn't work as well. So, if you provide precursors to nitric oxide, like this nitrates I'm talking about, you're making it easier for the enzymes located in the blood vessels to produce nitric oxide. And theoretically, high blood pressure is a possible side effect of high-dose steroid usage. Theoretically, if an athlete or a bodybuilder consume these vegetables that I mentioned or beet juice that are high in nitrates, they could possibly offset the side effect of high blood pressure that's caused by the steroid. That's just a supposition on my part, but the physiology behind it does make sense. Okay, so let's move on here. I talked about the elite athletes. I talked about there's one other side effect that has been associated with ingestion of nitrates, and that's the fact that nitrates, they could react with hemoglobin is that's the protein in red blood cells that carry oxygen. Hemoglobin contains iron, which allows it to transport oxygen. So what happens is when you take, it was thought years ago that nitrates would combine with the iron found in hemoglobin, and the nitrates, being a kind of a radical, would oxidize the iron in the hemoglobin, turning the hemoglobin into something called methemoglobin, which does not carry oxygen. And of course, this is a very serious problem. And will this happen if you ingest nitrates from vegetables? It's a possibility, but the truth is, it's a good possibility if you eat maybe 20 pounds a day of vegetables. And I'm not being facetious here. You have to eat a huge, huge amount of vegetables. Here's my proof. It's in front of all of us. Look at vegans. Vegans live on vegetables. That's all they eat. And yet they never almost never. I don't remember a single case of methemoglobin in an adult vegetarian. It could happen to let's say a child vegetarian if the parent fed them huge amounts of vegetables containing nitrates. Theoretically, they might get some methemoglobin effect. But even there, it's rare. So it's, again, this is something along with the cancer effect that we can dismiss. These are things that were thought to be true years ago, which are no longer accepted as true by organizations such as the World Health Organization. So, it's safe, it's non-toxic. But I will say this: nitrates, which are found in vegetables and beet juice, are completely non-toxic. They can never cause any problem. The same cannot be said for nitrites. Nitrites, as I said, in large amounts, they could cause they could turn into that carcinogen nitrosamine. They could, stimulate methemoglobin, and in large amounts, is a little bit of a shocking fact. Nitrite, not nitrates, nitrite is as toxic as the poison cyanide. Again, this is not something to be concerned about because the production of nitrate in the body is tightly controlled by enzymes and other substances and proteins in the body. Nothing to worry about. I'm only saying this just for the sake of completeness. Don't even think about it. Sorry I brought it up. But anyway. Hey, listen to this. I came across a recent study. This is really good. I mean, again, some of you have heard me talk about beet juice, but this really is intriguing. Caffeine, of course, is a famous ergogenic aid. I mean, it's probably the number one. It's actually the number one drug in the world is caffeine. But a lot of bodybuilders, athletes, I use it myself. I mean, I haven't had my coffee today. I know it seems like I have, but I usually take about 4 cups of coffee, and I take a little caffeine before I work out. Because it stimulates me. It stimulates better muscle contractions. Blah blah blah. But here's the thing: what this study showed. Get this, if you combine drinking 8 ounces of beet juice with about, it comes out to about, what is it? It was 5 milligrams of caffeine. It was 8 ounces of beet juice and 5 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. So, if you weigh, let's say 200 pounds, this would be equivalent to about 4 cups of coffee. So, if you take 4 cups if you're about 200 pounds, of course, if you're lighter weight, you don't have to take as much caffeine. Just remember 5 grams per kilogram of body weight of caffeine. Anyway, if you combine that with the beet juice, what this study shows was you increase the time to exhaustion when you exercise by 46%. 46%. I mean, that's tremendous. I mean, the difference in workout intensity is like mind-boggling, right? Okay, so, I mean, the drinking the beet juice and with its nitrate effect, it also increases energy, endurance, and workout intensity through other mechanisms. For example, it spares creatine. In other words, you don't burn up creatine as much when you have a good amount of nitric oxide circulating. And it also, by sparing creatine, it spares ATP levels, adenosine triphosphate. ATP is the immediate source of energy for all muscle contraction. So that's another way it increases energy. Now, there's another really kind of fascinating finding that I don't think very few people know about related to this nitrate intake. Men who use testosterone therapy, let's say a lot of men who are over 40, they're low on testosterone and they get prescriptions, or they don't get prescriptions to use testosterone. A lot of them prefer to use testosterone injections. Testosterone comes in different forms: gels, patches, pellets under the skin, sublingual, but a lot of guys prefer the injectables because it can give you a super physiological rise in testosterone after 48 hours, whereas the other forms of testosterone do not. They keep you in the mid-range. They don't really give you super physiological levels of testosterone. Why would you want super physiological levels? If you're working out, that slightly higher level of testosterone will support increased muscle growth. So that's kind of a reason. And a lot of guys just feel better when they take injectable testosterone. But here's the bad part. The number one most common side effect of injectable testosterone in men over 40, not so much younger men. For some reason, this affects men who are older, is a side effect called elevated hematocrit. Hematocrit is a medical term referring to the volume of red blood cells circulating in the blood. The hematocrit is a measure of the viscosity or thickness of the blood. If the hematocrit gets too high, the blood gets too thick, and that when the blood gets too thick, the circulation of the blood slows down, which increases the chance of internal clots forming, and it also increases the chances of a heart attack and stroke. So an elevated hematocrit is a serious problem. Men who are on testosterone therapy, if their hematocrit gets too high, they often have to. The real one medical treatment available is phlebotomy. You have to basically give blood to basically lower the viscosity. But here's the interesting part. Get this. It turns out that I don't want anyone to hear me. I don't know why I'm talking low. I'm only here by myself. Me and maybe the dogs. The dogs are listening to me. Anyway, the thing is, it turns out that nitrates, get this, nitrates that you consume in vegetables will actually help prevent elevated hematocrit. How does it do it? What it does, it turns out that the nitric oxide that's produced as a result of this intake of dietary nitrates, it suppresses some of the production of erythropoietin, also known as EPO. EPO is a protein produced in the body, produced in the bone marrow, that actually works to stimulate the production of red blood cells. You might have heard of EPO being used by cyclists because it's a natural form of blood doping. It increases the amount of hemoglobin or red blood cells, and by doing so, it increases supposedly oxygen delivery. But even there, if you take too much EPO, you can also wind up with elevated hematocrit and with serious medical problems. But it turns out that if you ingest dietary nitrates, you will suppress EPO to the extent of not getting anemia, but enough to bring your hematocrit down. Yeah, that's right. This is a natural way of treating elevated hematocrit. Isn't that something, right? Anyway, okay, so I hope you guys, now you guys know what to do. Keep eating those vegetables that I mentioned. Beet juice about maybe 30 minutes to 45 minutes before the workout. If you want to really super boost, add some, 3 to 4 cups of coffee. If you want even a greater boost, well, I don't know about this one. You could add 5 grams of creatine and add 0.03 grams per kilogram of body weight of sodium bicarbonate, better known as baking soda. The combination of all of these, it'd be scary because it would make you like Superman. There would be no sense of fatigue at all, none. I would say that to be careful with the sodium bicarb. If you take too much, some people are sensitive to it. It can cause you to have diarrhea. Not good to do in the gym. Won't make you very popular. Now, this video, I hope you've gotten some good information from it. But no, if you really want in-depth information, I strongly, strongly suggest that you subscribe to my Applied Metabolics newsletter. It's at www.appliedmetabolics.com. I mean, just to give you an example of I cover nutrition, ergogenic aids, fat loss research, anti-aging research, hormonal therapy, ergogenic aids. A lot of these newsletters just cover nutrition. I cover just about everything. I cover disease prevention, you name it. I kind of like cover a lot of off the road stuff that you won't find anywhere else because not many people know about this stuff. Like the thing I just told you about nitrates and elevated hematocrit. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that I write about that doesn't appear anywhere else. But I do cover basic stuff. So, if you're confused about nutrition or exercise, if you've been on the web and you've been confused by all the contradictory advice offered on some of these websites and in some of these videos that you see, the videos where the guys, have tattoos all over them and they curse every third word and they tell you to do 80 sets of curls before you go to sleep and not eat any food. If that's the kind of stuff that's confusing you, read my letter for read my newsletter for a rational voice of reason based on evidence-based science. I cover everything. I mean, I don't I just want to warn you, I've gotten a couple of people that were disappointed because they thought I was going to give out steroid regimes. This is not a steroid newsletter. I write about science related to steroids. I write about new studies related to steroids. I don't take any particular stand. I'm not out to condemn steroid use, and I'm not out to foster their use. I just report the science about them, but I do not give out specific steroid regimes, although I did give a steroid regime in one article, which was related to how a professional bodybuilder prepared for the Mr. Olympia. I did give his exact drug regime only for informational purposes, because what was said about this guy was total nonsense on the internet, and I wanted to basically relay the truth about what he actually did. But normally I don't like to talk about this steroid stuff, because first of all, there is no actual science-based steroid regime. None of it has been tested by science. It's all anecdotal. Everybody has individual biochemistry. It would be, I'm not a doctor. I can't prescribe this stuff. It'd be wrong for me to do so. If I were to give out this type of information and somebody got sick, it would make me feel terrible. And I can't do it. I am not going to do it. So if you're looking for information about steroids, about how to use them, I suggest that you go on the internet, read the websites that are dedicated to that information, look at the videos. I'm not going to include that in my newsletter because I just don't think it's ethical. But because of popular request, several people have asked me for an article on SARMs, which are selective androgen receptor modulators. These are new experimental drugs. They are not anabolic steroids. They're in the pipeline right now. They supposedly can take the place of steroids. They're being developed for use as possible hormonal therapy, in other words, to treat testosterone deficiencies, because they're not steroids. They do not affect the prostate, and they do not convert into estrogen, and they do not convert into dihydrotestosterone, as do testosterone-based therapies. A lot of your side effects are related to those conversions. But the problem and the reason why I've decided, I mean, my first impulse was not to write about the SARMs, because they are experimental drugs. They're not actually legally available. And there really isn't a lot of research related to young, healthy people who use this. Most of the research is with animals and frail older people. But the reason I've decided to go ahead and write this particular feature is because I did a survey on the internet of sites, various websites that are already selling these SARMs, and I was appalled at the nonsense being written about them, the hyperbole and the inflated claims made about this stuff is just pure crap. And as usual, I'm going to use my Applied Metabolics newsletter as an antidote. I'm going to give you the truth about these, and you can make up your own mind. Personally, honestly, speaking for myself, I would never purchase any of these things online, simply because I don't trust online vendors. They never reveal who they are. They never reveal their names. You have no idea whether this is, fake stuff or the genuine article. And I'm not saying that some of it isn't the real thing. The problem is, unless you have the product analyzed, you don't know. And again, don't forget the placebo effect. If you purchase this and you believe it's going to work, I'm talking about SARMs, very often it will, but it may not be the actual substance. It might be right here. In other words, it might be in your brain. Anyway, thanks for listening. I I tried to make this a half hour. I'm looking at the time. It's a 49-minute video. For those of you who've stayed all the way here to the end, thank you. And I'll see you again. Take care.